Okay, we are in Beis and Beis. We're 2b. And yesterday we developed an understanding of Rabbi Elazar's position, who said that there are two events in the law of the Sotah that get the exemption and allow for one witness rather than two. The first event that gets the exemption is that which the Torah explicitly states as getting an exemption, namely the moment of their physical intimacy. And if one witness saw their physical intimacy, then the law of the Sotah is called off, even at the word of one witness, because of this exemption. And that exemption extends to one other event, namely the moment of their seclusion. But the moment of his warning her, which is the first step in creating the law of the Sotah, or establishing the law of the Sotah, that moment requires two witnesses. That was the position of Rabbi Elazar. And we tried to understand why he extends that exemption to the moment of warning, to the moment of seclusion, rather than to the moment of warning. And the Gemara essentially went through three different stages in trying to understand this. The first is scriptural, where the Torah says, the Torah compares the moment of intimacy to the moment of seclusion. That the Gemara rejected because there's an equal scriptural comparison between the moment of intimacy and the moment of warning, the event of warning. So scripturally, it's a wash because there's an association with both events to the event of intimacy, which has the exemption. Then the Gemara tried to do it logically and say that somehow, logically speaking, legally speaking, the moment of seclusion is more closely related to the moment of intimacy legally, that is more associated than the moment of the warning. The Gemara rejected that too, because warning without seclusion and seclusion without warning is no Sotah. Sotah requires both. So legally speaking, there's no reason to give one more validity to get the exemption than the other. And finally, the Gemara went to just the physical reality on the ground. The physical reality on the ground is that their seclusion is the first step in their intimacy. And therefore, because their seclusion is the first step in their intimacy, therefore the exemption of intimacy is extended to their seclusion, because it's the beginning of that process, rather than to the moment of warning. All to say that when he warns her, in Rabbi Elazar's view, there must be two witnesses. When she secludes herself, it's enough to have one witness, or he himself can even say, I saw the two of them seclude themselves. But if we're going to cancel, and when we cancel the Sotah, because we know that they've been intimate, that's also enough. It's enough to have one witness for that event as well. This is where we are. If something's not clear, please unmute yourself and let me know. Now the Gemara is going to introduce a third opinion. Right? We had Rabbi Elazar, which we just explained, that the only event that requires two witnesses is his warning, whereas the seclusion and intimacy, only one witness is required. We had Rabbi Yeshua, mentioned in the Mishnah as well, and discussed a little bit briefly yesterday, who's of the view that the exemption for the moment of intimacy is exclusively to the moment of intimacy, and that both the warning and their seclusion require two witnesses. That's opinion number two. Now the Gemara is going to introduce a third opinion. So Mas Nisan, our Mishnah, which stated that Rabbi Elazar is of the view that the moment of seclusion does not require two witnesses. The moment of intimacy certainly doesn't require two witnesses. But the moment of warning does require two witnesses. The Loiki Haitana does not follow the following Mishnaic text. The Tanya for the following Mishnaic text reads as follows. Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yosi son of Yehuda said, Mishum Rabbi Elazar, the name of Rabbi Elazar. So we have Rabbi Elazar speaking in the Mishnah, but it's not actually Rabbi Elazar himself speaking. It's the compiler of the Mishnah, whose name is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He is telling us what Rabbi Elazar's view is. Now here in this Mishnaic text, we have Rabbi Yosi, son of Yehuda, who gives us another version to Rabbi Elazar's opinion. Now what's this other version of Rabbi Elazar's opinion? As follows. Hamakana leishtoi, one who warns his wife, mekana al pi eid echad, oy al pi atzmai. he can warn her in front of one witness, or he himself can say, I warned her. But umashkala, and he can only give her to drink from the waters of the Sotah, namely the moment of seclusion, al pishnayim, with two witnesses. So let's get this clear. Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah says, moment of warning, two witnesses. Moment of seclusion, one witness, or he alone can testify. Rabbi Eliezer in this brisa, quoted by Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, it says the reverse. The moment of warning, only one witness required, or he himself can come and say, I warned her. The moment of seclusion is when you need two witnesses. Or another way of putting it is, yesterday we established that the exemption applied to the moment of intimacy, where we allow one witness to determine that they were indeed intimate. And that exemption yesterday we extended to the moment of seclusion, that we only need one witness to tell us that they were secluded. But the moment of warning does not get the exemption and therefore requires the witnesses. In this model, Rabbi Eliezer's the exemption. In this model of Rabbi Eliezer, the exemption of the moment of intimacy that only requires one witness is extended to the warning, in that the warning only requires one witness, whereas the moment of seclusion requires two. So yesterday we were going back and forth by what's the virtue of extending the exemption to one over the other, and yesterday we concluded that it's better to extend the exemption to the moment of seclusion. Today, in this model of Rabbi Eliezer, it's better to extend the exemption to the moment of warning, and that the moment of warning only requires one witness, whereas the moment of seclusion requires two.
So this is the reverse of the Mishnah.
Correct. Which is why the Gemara began by saying, "Mas nisan like Haitana," that our Mishnah has a different version of Rabbi Eliezer. Correct. Now, Hishivu Chachamim. This we're concluding before we get into why Rabbi Eliezer in the what's the logic in this model of Rabbi Eliezer that extends the exemption to warning rather than to the seclusion. Why is this? What's the logic? How is the logic different than yesterday's? And what's his reasoning? Before the Gemara gets that, the Gemara concludes quoting that Mishnaic text, which reads, Heshivu Chachamim, the Divid Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, the sages responded to the words of Rabbi Yossi son of Yehuda, who said that Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that the moment of warning does not require two witnesses, whereas the moment of seclusion does require two witnesses. They responded to him and said, Ein ledavar sof. You're entering into a slippery slope, and there's no end. Okay, so before we get to, the Gemara is going to analyze soon what this means, that there's a slippery slope in Ein ledavar sof. So we're going to put a pin in that for a moment, because we're going to get back to that soon. But before that, the Gemara is first going to address my time at Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. What's the reason for Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda? Yesterday we came to the conclusion that because the moment of seclusion is the first stage in their intimacy, therefore the exemption that we apply to intimacy, that we allow one witness, is extended to the moment of seclusion, that we also only rely on one witness. What's the reason for Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, who today says that the exemption of one witness allowance by the moment of intimacy is extended to
Anybody having trouble hearing?
Can you not hear me? How about now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Yes? Okay, good. Sorry. So where was I? Where did I leave off? What was the last thing I said?
The Mishnah's position.
Sorry?
You're explaining the Mishnah's position.
Oh, so yesterday we explained the Mishnah's position that we extend the exemption of allowing one witness, that the Torah applies to the moment of intimacy. And we extend that exemption to the moment of seclusion, because seclusion is the beginning of intimacy. Now we have to know my time with Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. What's the reason for Rabbi Yossi, son of Yehuda, who reads Rabbi Eliezer as saying that the exemption for allowing one witness that's applied in the Torah to the moment of intimacy is extended to the moment of warning, and that the warning only needs one witness, or he himself can declare that I warned her, whereas the moment of seclusion requires two witnesses? What's his logic? So first the Gemara introduces the verse which we analyzed yesterday. On Markra, the verse reads, Ba, the moment of intimacy, it itself gets the exemption, but to the exclusion of at least one other event, as we said yesterday. Right? Rabbi Yeshua says that when the Torah says it itself gets the exemption, it means to the exclusion of any other event, and both other events require two witnesses. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says it's only to the exclusion of one event, allowing another event to have that exemption too. So which of the events are we excluding? In this model, that it itself, the moment of intimacy, gets the exemption and allowance for one witness, but not the moment of seclusion. The moment of seclusion requires two witnesses, but the moment of warning, only one. Says the Gemara of Eim above Alebekinoi. Why not apply it the other way around? Why not say that the exemption of one witness allowance by the moment of intimacy is to the exclusion of warning, as we did in yesterday's model, whereas the moment of seclusion does not require one witness? Why choosing one over the other? Like we said before, it's a wash. So we have to find some logical reasons. So first the Gemara does a scriptural comparison, which again is a wash, but the Gemara is going to go through that exercise. Scripturally, we compare the warning to the moment of intimacy. The verse reads, the verse puts the two events together, just in the way it describes it. He warns her, and then she was intimate. And that's why it's better to extend the exemption to the moment of warning, because it's been scripturally compared to the moment of intimacy. Says the Gemara, that's a wash. Because as we said yesterday, they both have scriptural comparisons. The moment of seclusion also is compared scripturally to the moment of intimacy. As it reads, she's secluded and then she became intimate. Okay, so there's a wash here. The scripturally speaking, the moment of intimacy is compared to the moment of seclusion, and the moment of intimacy is also compared to the warning. They're associated with both, and therefore, why are you choosing one over the other? So yesterday, the logic was the reason why we chose the exemption to be extended to the moment of seclusion, because seclusion is the first stage in intimacy. But in this model, Rabbi Yehuda says that the moment of seclusion does require two witnesses. So we have to find some logical reason for why the moment of the exemption, that we allow one witness for the moment of intimacy, should be applied to the moment of the warning, and that the warning can also be done by one person. So the Gemara goes like this. The Gemara stays with the scriptural analysis and says, when the Torah compares the moment of intimacy to the moment of seclusion, it's not because one leads to the other, as we said yesterday, but rather, the reason why the Torah compares the moment of seclusion to the moment of intimacy is to tell you how long seclusion has to be in order for it to be a valid Sotah. Namely, Kedei Tuma, the amount of time it takes for intimacy. So let's go through this. Scripturally, we said it's a wash. You can't choose one over the other. Why can't you choose one over the other? Because the exemption is for the moment of intimacy. And scripturally speaking, the moment of intimacy is associated with the moment of warning, and it's also associated with the moment of seclusion. And if there's no reason to choose one over the other, scripturally speaking. But now the Gemara says, no. The fact that there is a scriptural association between the moment of intimacy and the moment of seclusion is required to teach us a specific law, namely, how long should seclusion be if we want to make this a valid Sotah? Answer, it has to be as long as it takes for intimacy, and therefore there's association. So it's not a wash anymore, right? The reason why yesterday we canceled each other out is because there's an equal association to this one, to seclusion, and to an equal association to warning. But now we see that the association is not equal, because the association between intimacy and seclusion is not a freestanding seclusion, not a freestanding association that I can use to extend an exemption. It's not. That association is required to teach us the law of how long the seclusion has to be. Namely, it has to be as long as intimacy would take. So what am I left with? I'm left with only one more association. The association between warning and seclusion and intimacy. And therefore, the exemption of intimacy applies to the moment of warning, because it's no longer a wash anymore, considering that the association between intimacy and seclusion is required to teach us a different law. Is that clear? Yeah? Okay, if it's not, please chime in. Right. I'll clarify a little bit more. If we want to derive something scripturally, then whatever we're using to derive from that verse must be a freestanding, available limud. In other words, like this: if the word that the Torah is using is already teaching us one law, I can't use that as a proof to teach me another law, because it's not freestanding, right? The only time you can use that you can use a scriptural proof to teach a law is when you say the Torah didn't have to say this word, but it said it anyway. And because it said it, it teaches me a law. But if the Torah had to say the word to teach us a third law, then you can't use it for both because it's not a freestanding available limud. So the same thing is true here. You can only take the association, scriptural association between two events to teach you this exemption if that association is not needed to teach us any other law. But over here, the association between intimacy and seclusion is required. And it is indeed used to teach us the length of seclusion. In order for the seclusion to be valid enough to cause it to be a sotah, it has to be as long as intimacy. So that association is not up and available for me to learn and say that the exemption is extended. I can't do that because it's already been used to teach me something else. So I'm left with one other association. Which association? The association between intimacy and warning. Exactly. And therefore, the exemption of intimacy goes to warning. Okay. So now we get back to the statement of the sages. The Gemara says, "Heshivu chachamim." The Mishnaic H text responded to the Divid Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, to the words of Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, who said that the moment of warning is only one witness, whereas seclusion is two witnesses. They said to him, "Ein l'davar sof." You're going down a slippery slope and there's no end. The Gemara asks, mind you, what's the slippery slope we're going down? What's the problem? One witness here, two witnesses there. What's the difference? At the end of the day, you have two witnesses for the seclusion. Why is there no slippery slope? She says like this: the Zimnin, because it's possible, the Loikani, he's not actually going to warn her. But then she secludes herself with some guy. He's super jealous and he gets angry. And he comes to the court, and he says, Kanoi, I warned her. Fabricated the story. So and that's why they're saying there's no end to the story. You can't prevent someone from lying. This is something that the judge was saying yesterday. Which one of these events is more likely he's going to lie about? At the moment, the Gemara says like this: if the warning does not require two witnesses, and the husband himself can testify and say, I warned her, then every single time a husband gets jealous of a wife because she was secluded with some other guy, he's going to come to court and say, I warned her, and turn her into a sotah. And we have no way of disproving him because the Torah says, according to this view, you're allowed to you believe the husband when he says, I warned her, even if there's no witnesses. So, you're retroactively fabricating a sotah because he got angry that she was private with somebody. Is that clear?
Yeah.
It says the Gemara, hold on a second. So the Rebbe Lezer described in the Braisa slippery slope because he's going to invent retroactively the moment of warning because he's angry that she was secluded. Hola Mishnah Seinu, in our Mishnah, yesh l'davar soif, it's not a slippery slope in our Mishnah. Think of the other way around. Let's say we have two witnesses in the Rebbe Lezer of our Mishnah, two witnesses for the moment of warning, but no witnesses for the moment of seclusion. So Zimnin, sometimes he's going to warn her in front of two witnesses, and then a week later he's going to get angry at her, and he's going to go to court. The lawyer is not there; she did not seclude herself, but for Omar he's going to come to court and say, "It's not there. I saw her seclude." He's going to make up a seclusion. In other words, if we're worried about the husband making up an event to turn her into a sotah, then what's the difference if he's making up a retroactive event that he warned her before a seclusion of two witnesses, or whether he made up an event that she secluded herself after he warned with two witnesses? In both events, he made up a story. So why would the sages say by the Braisa that over there it's a slippery slope, but our Mishnah is not a slippery slope? They're both a slippery slope, because in both events, if we're allowing for the husband to say on his own word something that happened, then what's the difference which event we're allowing him to say? Whether after two witnesses say they secluded, he makes up an event that I once upon a time warned her, like Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, or whether he warned her in front of two witnesses and later makes up a story. I saw her seclude herself. In either way, it's a slippery slope because we're allowing the husband to make up a story. Pretty straightforward question. Clear?
Yeah.
So Amar, therefore, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Rabbi Yitzchak, son of Yosef, says, Rabbi Yochanan, what you have to add a word to the Braisa. This word af. Even according to the Braisa, there's a slippery slope. Meaning to say, the slippery slope is in both instances. It's not as if the Brisa is saying only in this case is a slippery slope. Even in the Brisa, there's no end. Meaning to say, there's for sure a slippery slope. There's a slippery slope in the Mishnah, because after he warns her in front of two witnesses, he can make up a story that she was secluded. And there's also a slippery slope in the Brisa's model, because after there's two witnesses that she was secluded, he can make up a story that at once upon a time warned her. So the Gemara says like this: the word af, which means even, implies that the first one is more obvious, right? Even the Brisa has a slippery slope, which means for sure our Mishnah. So let's see that. What you're saying is that even in the model of the Brisa of Rabbi by Yehuda's opinion, like we said today from Belezer, that the moment of warning does not require two witnesses, but the moment of seclusion does. And over there, it's a slippery slope because he might invent the story that he once upon a time warned her. And therefore, it's obvious and certainly that you can make up a story in our Mishnah where he warned her with two witnesses and then later makes up a story that she's secluded. Seemingly adrabah. Seemingly on the contrary. The Mishnah Seinu, in our Mishnah, it's less likely he'll make up a story because ikar. We have at least the beginning of a story where he warned her. We have a valid two witnesses to say the beginning of the story. Hasam leika ikar. Over there, there's no witnesses to establish the main point of the Sotah, which is when he warns her. So the slippery slope is more in the Brisa scenario, where there's no witnesses for warning, than it is for our Mishnah. So why would you use the word even? The word even implies that for sure in our Mishnah is a slippery slope. But even in this Brisa, it's the other way around. The slippery slope is more likely that he's angry at her for being secluded and make up a story that he warned her. It's less likely that he warns her in front of two witnesses when we have an established problem in their marriage and then later makes up a story that they secluded. That's a less likely scenario. It's more likely that after witnesses see that she secluded herself and we have no established history of their problematic marriage, he makes up a story about a history. That's a more likely lie. And therefore, don't say even about the Brisa when seemingly our Mishnah is less likely to be the lie. And if anything, you should say even our Mishnah, meaning for sure the Brisa and even our Mishnah. Hope that's somewhat clear. Okay. If it's not, again, of course, please chime in. And if
he's more likely to be jealous on the seclusion part,
exactly,
rather than the warning.
Exactly. Especially
it's more believable that he's lying during the seclusion part, because
correct.
That's where the jealousy really kicks in.
Exactly. And that's more likely he'll lie there. And moreover, when I warn her in front of two witnesses, then the court already has an established record of their issue in marriage. So we already have our eyes on them because we already have an established problem. Whereas in the other scenario, there was no problem. She secluded herself with some guy and he came to the Beis Din, and the entire story from beginning to end is brought to them right then and there. Right? There's no two stages. In the scenario where he warns her in front of two witnesses, okay, so we have an established record that there's an issue here. And then there's a second part of the story, and we have to validate the second part of the story. So there's already the germination of an issue. Whereas in the other, we're keeping tabs on them, as it were. Whereas in the other scenario, we have no record of their problems. And all of a sudden he walks in and says, here's my two witnesses, she's secluded. And by the way, a month ago I warned her. We have no record to start arguing with him. We're saying he's right or wrong. We're stuck. And if the Gemara says like this, Ella rather, Itmar, if you're going to have this teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, which says that both the Mishnah and the Brisa have a slippery slope, you shouldn't use it as the word, as Hachi Itmar. Here's how you should say it. Don't use the word even. Here's how you should say it. Amr Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef says, Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan. L'div Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda. To the words of Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, who says that you can warn on your own accord and you need two witnesses for seclusion. Then and even in our Mishnah, there's a slippery slope. In other words, the slippery slope is more likely in the model of Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda. But if you're going to go with that, then even our Mishnah has no end. So the even goes on our Mishnah because that's less likely to be a lie than the like you said when he's in the Brisa where he sees and he has witnesses of the two of them being secluded, now all of a sudden he gets angry and makes up a story from retroactively. It's more likely. And therefore you should read the even not on the Brisa, but the even on the Mishnah. That if you have a slippery slope in the Brisa, then even our Mishnah could also be a slippery slope, because it is possible that after he warns her in front of two witnesses, he'll make up a story that she was secluded. Okay, I hope that was somewhat clear. We'll stop over here. And just to kind of wrap this all up before we go forward tomorrow, we have three opinions. And we have three events. We have the event of warning, the event of seclusion, those two establish the law of the Sotah. And we have the event of intimacy, which undoes the law of the Sotah, which will cancel the law of the Sotah. Now, the law of the moment of intimacy to cancel the law of the Sotah, Scripture is clear, only one witness. That we did 2 days ago. We went through the whole back and forth and now analyzing Scripture. But the conclusion is it's clear, only one witness required to tell us that they were intimate to cancel the law of the Sotah. Okay. Now, in the other two events, to create the Sotah, not to cancel it, but to create it, the moment of his warning, the event of his warning, and the event of their seclusion, we have one opinion of Yeshua which says both of them require two witnesses, just like every other case in Torah. Opinion number two, Rabbi Lezer of our Mishnah, at the moment of warning requires two witnesses, because that's how you establish a Sotah. Whereas the moment of seclusion only requires one witness, because that moment of seclusion is most associated with the exemption of the verse of intimacy. That was yesterday's Gemara, Rabbi Lezer of our Mishnah. Then you have Rabbi Lezer of the Brisa, in the name of Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda, who quotes Rabbi Lezer, which says, the moment of intimacy, of course, only one witness. That's clear from the verse. The moment of warning, also only one witness, because there's a scriptural association between the two. The moment of seclusion, that's when you require two witnesses. As far as a scriptural association between seclusion and intimacy, that is there to teach us how long the seclusion has to last. The seclusion has to last as long as intimacy would last. And those are the three tracks in understanding these three events and when you require two or one witness. And then the final comment from the Gemara is that Rabbi Lezer's model is somewhat faulty no matter how you cut it. Because if only one event requires two witnesses, then we're allowing for the husband to fabricate the other event. However you slice it, that remains the reality. So this is kind of a wrap-up of this whole section. And tomorrow, God willing, we get back to a discussion we had earlier about whether or not a person should or should not warn his wife. We began this Gemara by asserting that a person should not warn his wife. And the Gemara is now going to get into more detail about that. That is, God willing, coming tomorrow. Good Chodesh and a good day. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please.
Again, Rabbi Levi, thank you for this summary. My